Hello, Sevies. Week 3 starts off, of course, on a fairly somber note with the passing of our superintendent, Dr. Ed Richardson, and of course, Kayla's dad. Just want you to make sure that you kind of keep them in your thoughts. It's a tough time, not only dealing with the coronavirus, but to deal with the death. And yeah, just keep them in your thoughts. So, here's what we're doing uh, with this little YouTube video is remember, we're just reviewing things. When we left off, we got involved in the Revolutionary War, the Declaration of Independence, why we celebrate July 4th. Happened in 1776. We eventually fight this war called the Revolutionary War to gain independence from Great Britain. Along with the writing of the Declaration of Independence, our Second Continental Congress also creates our first Constitution.
The first government set up by the Continental Congress was called the Articles of Confederation, and it was, in a word, bad. In 2 words, it was not good, which is why it only lasted 10 years.
The Founding Fathers intentionally designed a nation with a very weak central government. There is no judicial branch, no executive branch, so there's no president, which when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. You know, the colonists had just been through a really bad breakup with the British king, and they're not about to get back together with a government who looked just like their ex, okay? We've all made that mistake before, okay? You go and date a girl like the last girl you dated, you're gonna get hurt, okay? Don't do this to yourself.
So, what this guy is trying to say is that once we created our new country and our new government, we wanted it to be different than the old government. And the biggest reason is because we feared a strong government like a king. And so we create something that's going to be totally different. But we found out that being totally different isn't always good either, because we created a weak central government that couldn't handle the problems that our country needed to handle. Number one problem is we now have this huge war debt, and we can't pay it off because we cannot tax the states. It was the way that we set things up. We gave the states way more power than the central government. So the big image we talked about remembering when it came to the Articles of Confederation is this weak individual who's not strong enough to handle the problems of
The Congress, which was just a single chamber with a delegate from every state, did have some power, like the authority to make treaties and alliances, maintain an army, and coin money. But they couldn't levy the taxes to pay for those things. In fact, under the Articles of Confederation, paying federal taxes was voluntary for the states, who of course were like, no thanks, we're good. The US had borrowed money from European investors and nations to pay for the Revolutionary War, but with no power to tax, the United States couldn't pay back any of those debts, creating a huge economic disaster by 1787. With no funds and limited power, the central government couldn't do much to protect peace at home. This became abundantly clear during Shays' Rebellion in 1786, when farmers in Massachusetts violently protested against the state's high taxes. So if the Articles of Confederation weren't working, why didn't they just make changes to it? Well, it was practically impossible. Amendments to the Articles needed unanimous consent, and the delegates from the 13 states had more opinions than a YouTube comment section. By the way, you should comment on this video right now. Say something nice about me. This weak Congress and a broke, ineffective federal government eventually proved to be too much of a burden on the United States.
So you can kind of hopefully understand that after the Revolutionary War, we created a bad government, a weak government, because we were afraid of having a strong king again. But we found out a great lesson that a government needs power. And we found that out because there was a ton of problems that came about. And the final straw is going to be that little rebellion that happened in Massachusetts called Shays' Rebellion. And so with Shays' Rebellion, that kind of got people thinking, we got to do something different. And eventually that's going to lead to the
But they agreed to
Constitutional
meet the
Convention.
next year in Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation. The delegates who met in Philly the next year had a funny definition of revision, though. Rather than make tweaks to the Articles, they wrote a new charter of government, the Constitution, which is, with some significant alterations, the same one that Americans live under and argue about today. Despite what some seem to believe, the 55 men who met in Philadelphia and hammered out a new form of government were not gods, but they were far from ordinary, especially for the time. Most were wealthy, some very much so. More than half had college educations, which was super rare since 0.001% of Americans attended college at the time. About 40% had served in the army during the war. But one thing they all shared was a desire for a stronger national government.
So before we get to talking about that desire for a stronger central national government, we should bring up that there were three good things that took place right there with the Articles of Confederation. Number one, it kept our country together during this critical period, which is good. Nobody broke away, nobody became their own nation. Second thing, it created a way to settle the lands all the way to the Mississippi, and then when we keep on expanding, it's going to be the way we settle America. Okay, and that was called the Northwest Ordinance. And then finally, it created a way for these new territories to eventually apply to see if they could become a part of America. And with that, 37 territories are eventually going to ask the United States, hey, we've met all these requirements of the Northwest Ordinance. Can we become a state? And so that's how America was made. So next up, a little bit about the Constitution.